The sun hung low over the vast expanse of the American frontier, casting long, golden shadows across the rugged terrain. Dust swirled in the dry wind, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and the faint tang of iron from distant streams. This was a land of extremes, where survival was a daily battle and legends were born as easily as the wind shifted over the mesas. In the small, weathered town of Red Rock, nestled between jagged cliffs and open plains, the townsfolk lived under a quiet tension. Stories of danger and daring had always threaded through their conversations, but none were as chilling or revered as the tales of the Apache Queen. She was a figure shrouded in mystery and fear. Some said she could track a man through a moonless night as easily as following a marked trail, that her arrows never missed, and her gaze alone could freeze a man with terror. The Queen ruled her people with a combination of fierce intelligence and uncompromising strength, and the few who claimed to have seen her spoke in whispers, careful not to tempt fate. Her presence was more than just a warning. It was a symbol of the untamed power of the land itself. To the settlers and wandering cowboys, she was a living embodiment of the frontier's harsh realities. Beautiful, dangerous, and untouchable. Meanwhile, in the same unforgiving landscape, rode a lone cowboy whose reputation preceded him in a different way. Known simply as Jack Callahan, he was a drifter who had roamed from one dusty town to another, leaving behind tales of courage, narrow escapes, and uncanny skill with both horse and gun. Unlike many men who sought comfort in fences, lawmen, or settlements, Jack thrived on the unpredictability of the frontier. He had faced stampeding cattle, ruthless bandits, and treacherous rivers, yet he carried himself with a quiet confidence that drew admiration and occasionally envy from those he met along the way. But more than anything, Jack was guided by a restless curiosity, a desire to confront the unknown rather than shy away from it. The frontier was a place where such lives intersected with legend. To hear the people of Red Rock talk, the Apache Queen and her warriors were more than just a threat. They were an unspoken test of a man's courage. Stories flowed through the town like the river through the canyon. Tales of men who ventured too close to her territory and never returned, of skirmishes that left scorched earth in their wake, and of the Queen herself, whose beauty was as sharp as the blade she wielded. It was said that she could sense fear, and those who approached her without courage or respect were swiftly dealt with. These stories, though terrifying, carried a strange allure for someone like Jack. That afternoon, as he rode along the winding paths of Red Rock's outskirts, Jack could feel the weight of those stories pressing on him like the heat of the sun overhead. The landscape around him seemed to shift with anticipation, as if the hills themselves were whispering about the Queen's power. For Jack, this was no longer just another stretch of wilderness. It was a stage for a challenge unlike any he had faced before. He knew that whatever lay ahead would test not just his skill with a gun or a horse, but the very essence of his courage and judgment. In the silence between the wind and the rustling of leaves, the legend of the Apache Queen and the bravery of the lone cowboy began to intertwine. The frontier, wild and untamed, had always been a place where men and myths collided, and soon, Jack Callahan's path would lead him to an encounter that no man had survived until now. Red Rock was a town built on dust, determination, and rumor. Its streets, lined with wooden storefronts and sagging porches, echoed with the clatter of wagon wheels and the occasional shout of cowhands returning from the plains. But on this particular evening, a different kind of energy pulsed through the town, a mix of fear, curiosity, and the thrill of whispered stories. The townsfolk had gathered at the saloon, at the livery stable, and even at the edge of the dusty main street to exchange the latest news about the Apache Queen, whose name alone was enough to still a man's heartbeat. The rumors were as varied as they were terrifying. Some said she had the cunning of a fox and the ruthlessness of a panther. Others claimed she was unstoppable in battle, and that her warriors followed her without question, like shadows that moved as one. But the most chilling tale was the one repeated over and over with hushed reverence. No white man had ever survived an encounter with her. Those who ventured into her territory, curious or foolish, were never seen again. Some vanished silently, leaving only the whispers of the wind to mourn them. Others returned broken, their eyes haunted by the Queen's gaze, unable to recount the horrors they had witnessed. Jack Callahan, the cowboy whose reputation for bravery often preceded him, had arrived in Red Rock just days before. He leaned against the wooden railing outside the general store, sipping water from a tin cup, and listened to the murmurs with a mixture of intrigue and amusement. Unlike the other men whose eyes darted nervously as they spoke, Jack's gaze was steady, his posture relaxed. The tales of the Apache Queen did not terrify him, they provoked him. Each story seemed like a challenge, a dare whispered by the wind itself, and he found himself drawn to the legend rather than repelled by it. "You hear about Jenkins?" a husky voice whispered from the shadows. It was old Tom, the town's unofficial storyteller whose beard had grown white with age and whose eyes twinkled with mischief and fear. "He went out toward Apache Ridge last week. Never came back. Folks say he ran into the Queen herself." Jack raised an eyebrow, leaning casually against his horse. "Ran into her, did he? And how'd that turn out?" he asked, his tone half amused, half curious. Tom shivered. "You don't want to know, son. They say she looks right into a man's soul, knows if he's brave or just plain foolish. Jenkins, well, he wasn't lucky." The cowboy let out a low whistle, not of fear but of recognition. He knew the stories, of course, but each one painted the Queen as not just a warrior, but a force of nature, a being whose power was as much in her mind as in her sword arm. Yet, rather than deterring him, it made Jack's pulse quicken. To survive such a meeting, he realized, would take more than quick reflexes. It would take courage, respect, and perhaps a measure of luck, the likes of which few had ever known. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of crimson and gold, the town seemed to shrink beneath the shadows of the surrounding cliffs. The rumor of the Apache Queen's dominance hung in the air like a warning, yet for Jack, it felt like a call to adventure. That night, as he made his way to the small stable where his horse waited, he thought not of the danger ahead, but of the story he would live to tell, or die trying. The frontier had always favored the bold, and if legend was to be made, it would begin with a man willing to meet fear head-on. The whispers of Red Rock followed him as he rode into the twilight. They spoke of the Queen, of vanished men, and of the peril that awaited anyone foolish enough to enter her domain. But for Jack Callahan, the rumors were not warnings. They were a map, guiding him toward a destiny that had tested countless men before him. And soon he would discover whether bravery could truly match the deadly force that was the Apache Queen. The desert was silent, save for the faint rustle of dry brush in the evening wind and the occasional cry of a distant hawk circling above. Jack Callahan rode with a deliberate calm, his horse's hooves stirring small clouds of dust that caught the last rays of sunlight. The closer he ventured to Apache territory, the more the air seemed to thrum with tension, as if the land itself recognized the meeting about to take place. Every ridge and canyon seemed alive, shadows stretching like fingers, hiding eyes that might be watching. It was then, as the canyon walls narrowed and the path became treacherous, that he caught his first glimpse of her. She stood atop a small rise silhouetted against the crimson sky. The Apache Queen was even more formidable than the rumors suggested. Her posture was regal, commanding, and yet fluid, like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the horizon, and when they landed on Jack, a flicker of recognition, or was it curiosity, crossed her face. Jack slowed his horse, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. Every fiber of his being was alert. He knew this moment could decide whether he survived to see another sunset. The stories had not done her justice. She radiated power and focus, and even from a distance, Jack could feel the weight of her presence pressing down, as if the air itself bowed to her authority. Yet in that same presence, he sensed something else, a spark of intelligence and awareness that set her apart from any opponent he had ever faced. For a long moment, neither moved. The wind carried the scent of sage and dry earth, the quiet punctuated only by the soft snort of Jack's horse and the distant rustle of leaves. He could see the warriors stationed behind her, blending almost seamlessly with the rocky terrain, their eyes trained on him, ready to act at a moment's notice. The tension was palpable, a living thing in the desert. Every instinct in Jack's body screamed caution, but another, deeper instinct urged him forward: curiosity. Bravery, after all, was often born in the balance between fear and daring. Finally he spoke, his voice steady, carrying across the short distance. "Evening," he called out, tipping his hat slightly. There was no arrogance in the gesture, only respect. The Queen's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Jack feared he had overstepped. Then, to his surprise, she nodded once, almost imperceptibly acknowledging him. It was a small gesture, but in it he recognized the first crack in the formidable wall of legend surrounding her. She didn't approach, and neither did he. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken challenge. Jack studied her, noting every detail: the way her hair was tied back to keep it from her face, the gleam of weapons at her side, the calm, controlled way she shifted her weight. He realized that to survive this encounter, he would have to do more than show courage. He would have to demonstrate understanding, patience, and respect for the rules of her world. As the sun dipped below the horizon and shadows deepened across the canyon, Jack made a decision. He would not rush forward recklessly. He would wait, observe, and seek the opening that could earn him a chance at dialogue, or at least a chance to leave alive. The Queen's piercing gaze followed him as he moved his horse slightly, making no sudden motions, signaling that he meant no harm. In that first encounter, more than just two individuals met. Two worlds collided. The frontier's wild unpredictability met the calculated, disciplined power of a warrior queen. And as night fell and the canyon grew darker, Jack felt a thrill he had never known, the knowledge that history might very well be written in the choices he made in the next few moments. This was the first step in a dangerous dance, one that could cost him everything, or prove that even legends could be challenged by bravery tempered with respect. The night had fully claimed the canyon, wrapping the landscape in shadows that flickered under the pale glow of a rising moon. Jack Callahan knew that this was no ordinary journey through the frontier. He was deep in the heart of the Apache Queen's domain, where every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig could signal danger. His muscles were tense, his senses sharpened, and his mind alert to the slightest change in the environment. This was a place where missteps could be fatal, and the stories of vanished men weighed heavily on him, not as warnings, but as tests he was determined to face. The first real challenge came unexpectedly. As Jack guided his horse through a narrow passage between jagged rocks, a sudden movement caught his eye. A figure leapt from the shadows, a scout of the Queen's warriors, testing him or perhaps warning him. Without hesitation, Jack drew his revolver, his hand steady despite the tension in his chest. The scout froze, watching, and then vanished as silently as he appeared. It was a small encounter, but it set the tone. This was no idle territory. Every step forward was a measure of his courage and wits. Further along, the trail narrowed into a rocky incline, with sheer cliffs on one side and a deep chasm on the other. Jack's horse snorted nervously, sensing the danger. The cowboy took a deep breath, whispering calming words to his companion. Every movement had to be precise. One wrong shift in weight, one startled hoof, and both could tumble into the abyss. This was more than physical skill. It was a test of nerve, a test of composure under pressure. Jack focused, his eyes scanning the ground for loose stones, his hands gripping the reins firmly yet gently, guiding his mount with careful calculation. The environment itself seemed to conspire to test him. A sudden gust of wind rattled the dry branches above, sending a small cascade of stones tumbling down the cliffside. The echo reverberated like a gunshot, and Jack's pulse spiked. He remained calm, letting the horse steady itself, proving to both himself and the unseen watchers that fear could be controlled. The Apache Queen had trained her warriors to recognize hesitation, and Jack understood that his ability to remain composed was as important as any display of physical skill. As he reached a small plateau, the glow of the Queen's campfires became visible in the distance. It was an imposing sight. Several fires surrounded by the silhouettes of her warriors, their forms blending with the darkness. Jack knew that approaching recklessly would be suicide. Instead, he halted at the edge of a rocky outcrop, observing silently. He could feel the weight of 100 eyes upon him, judging every breath, every heartbeat. Courage, he realized, was not the absence of fear. It was moving forward despite it, with respect and awareness of the forces around him. To prove himself further, Jack took out a small pouch of provisions and laid it on a flat stone in plain view, a gesture of peace and respect for the Queen's territory. It was subtle but significant. The Queen's scouts observed carefully, whispering to one another before retreating without a sound. In that moment, Jack sensed a shift. His courage had been acknowledged. He had passed the first critical test not through aggression, but through intelligence, calmness, and respect. The night deepened, and Jack knew that even greater trials awaited. Yet as he gazed at the flickering campfires ahead, he felt a surge of confidence. He had faced the first challenge of the Apache Queen's domain and emerged intact. This was more than survival. It was a measure of his bravery, a test that few men could pass. And he understood, with a thrill both terrifying and exhilarating, that the true encounter with the Queen was still ahead. This was the crucible in which courage was forged, and Jack Callahan was ready to prove that he was more than just another tale whispered in the shadow of the canyon. The firelight from the Apache camp flickered across the canyon walls, casting long shadows that danced like spirits in the night. Jack Callahan approached cautiously, every step deliberate, every sense heightened. The closer he got, the more he felt the weight of history pressing down. The countless men who had entered this territory and never returned, the legends whispered in fear and awe by settlers and cowboys alike. But Jack's resolve remained unshaken. He had survived the initial tests, and now the ultimate trial awaited, a direct meeting with the Apache Queen herself. At the center of the camp, she awaited, seated on a low rock with a commanding posture that radiated authority. Her dark eyes, sharp and penetrating, followed his every move. Unlike the whispers of terror that had preceded him, the Queen's presence was composed, controlled, and intelligent. She did not need to speak to assert power. Every gesture, every subtle shift of her weight conveyed dominance. Yet there was also a flicker of curiosity in her gaze. A question. Who was this man who dared to enter her domain unafraid? Jack dismounted with care, letting his horse kneel under the weight of the saddle. He kept his hands visible, resting lightly on the reins, signaling respect rather than threat. "Evening," he said quietly, tipping his hat in a gesture of courtesy. The Queen's eyes narrowed, assessing him with the precision of a seasoned warrior. Time seemed to stretch, the silence thick and deliberate, as though the land itself was holding its breath. The Queen finally spoke, her voice calm, low, and commanding. "Why have you come here, white man?" Every word was deliberate, measured, carrying the weight of authority and experience. Jack met her gaze without flinching, understanding that this was more than a simple question. It was a test of intent, of character, and of courage. "I've come to see," Jack replied evenly, choosing his words carefully. "Not to fight, not to steal, not to disrespect. I wanted to meet the one whose name echoes across the plains, to understand what makes a legend like you." His words were sincere, carrying the weight of someone who had faced danger before, but understood that bravery without respect was nothing more than foolishness. For a moment, the Queen said nothing. She studied him, her eyes scanning every detail, the set of his jaw, the steadiness of his hands, the calm in his posture. Around her, her warriors remained silent, alert, but not hostile. The tension in the air was palpable, the kind that could snap in an instant if Jack misjudged even the smallest detail. Then, slowly, she inclined her head, a gesture almost imperceptible, yet monumental. It was acknowledgement, recognition of a man who had entered her world and met her on her terms. She rose gracefully, every movement deliberate, and circled him with the quiet confidence of a predator assessing prey and finding none. Jack remained still, feeling the gravity of the moment settle around him. He realized that this was no ordinary encounter. Here, legends collided, courage was tested, and respect became as powerful as any weapon. As the night deepened, the first words of dialogue gave way to a silent understanding. Jack's presence in her territory, his careful respect, and his evident bravery had granted him a fragile, hard-won acknowledgement. The Queen's gaze softened fractionally, not completely, but enough to signal that he had passed the first critical threshold of survival. Recognition. In that moment, the frontier ceased to be just a wild land of danger. It became a stage for a meeting that few could imagine, a convergence of courage and power that would be spoken of for generations. Jack Callahan had faced the legendary Apache Queen, and though the encounter was only beginning, he had already proven that he was no ordinary man, and that survival, in her world, depended on more than strength or skill. It depended on courage, respect, and understanding. The night held its breath, awaiting what would come next. A deeper test of skill, wit, and endurance that would define not only Jack's fate, but the legend of the meeting itself. The campfires crackled softly, sending up sparks that vanished into the night sky like fleeting stars. Jack Callahan remained still, his eyes never leaving the Apache Queen, who watched him with a calculating gaze. The silence was not empty. It was a test. In her presence, every movement, every breath, every glance was observed. Jack understood this instinctively. Survival here depended not just on courage, but on demonstrating skill, intelligence, and respect. The Queen finally spoke, her voice low and commanding. "If you wish to remain here, you must show me why you are worthy," she said. Her words were deliberate, not threatening, but there was no mistaking the challenge they contained. Around her, her warriors shifted, their eyes focused on Jack, assessing his reaction as much as she was. It was a moment where legends were forged, and Jack knew that hesitation or arrogance could be fatal. He nodded slowly, meeting her gaze with calm determination. "I don't seek to conquer, ma'am. I seek only to prove that courage and respect matter as much as strength," he replied, choosing his words with care. The Queen's eyes narrowed, a flicker of interest crossing her face. It was clear she had seen many men before, most of whom failed to understand the delicate balance of fear, respect, and bravery. Jack had entered her world on her terms, and now he would demonstrate that he belonged. The first test came swiftly. One of her warriors stepped forward, placing a long, curved knife into a low set of stakes in the dirt. The challenge was subtle, a display of dexterity, precision, and nerve. Without hesitation, Jack drew a small throwing knife from his belt, taking careful aim. The firelight flickered across his face, illuminating the determination in his eyes. He threw, and the blade embedded itself cleanly beside the warriors without hesitation or misstep. A murmur of approval rippled through the camp. The Queen studied him closely, her expression unreadable. She stepped closer, and in a fluid motion, she unsheathed her own blade. A short, deadly weapon designed for precision and speed. "Strength alone does not make a warrior," she said, circling him slowly. "Understanding, timing, and judgment do." She lunged suddenly, demonstrating a technique that would have felled any unprepared opponent. Jack ducked instinctively, his reflexes honed from years on the frontier, and countered with a careful maneuver that demonstrated both skill and restraint. Again, her eyes betrayed a flicker of recognition. This was not a contest of violence, but of respect, intelligence, and courage. Each action, each measured movement communicated Jack's understanding of her world. He moved with confidence, careful not to provoke unnecessary aggression, yet demonstrating the ability to respond with precision and skill. The Queen's warriors observed quietly, recognizing the subtle mastery of a man who could hold his own without challenging authority outright. Finally, the Queen lowered her blade, signaling the end of the demonstration. Her eyes met Jack's, sharp and discerning, yet tinged with acknowledgement. "You are not the first to enter here," she said, "but you are the first I have seen who respects the balance of power and restraint." The words were praise in her, measured tone, a rare gift from a woman whose standards were as fierce as her reputation. Jack exhaled softly, his muscles relaxing slightly but his senses still alert. He had proven himself not through brute force, but through courage, intelligence, and respect, the qualities that mattered most in her world. The Queen's acknowledgement was more than survival. It was the first step toward trust, an unspoken understanding that their meeting had shifted from confrontation to something far more profound. As the night deepened and the stars spread across the vast western sky, Jack realized that the hardest part of his journey was not just surviving the encounter, but earning the recognition of a legend. The Apache Queen had tested him, and he had passed. Yet the path ahead promised even greater challenges, and he knew that proving himself once was only the beginning of what lay ahead in her world. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of sagebrush and the distant smoke of the Apache campfires. Jack Callahan had proven his skill and courage, yet the true test of survival in this territory was still ahead. Bravery alone was not enough. He needed trust, both given and earned, in a world where every gesture could carry life or death consequences. It came sooner than he expected. From the shadows of the canyon, a rustle and a sharp cry signaled danger. A small group of rival warriors, unaffiliated with the Queen, emerged from the darkness, eyes gleaming with hostility. They were testing the camp's defenses, hoping to strike quickly and vanish before retaliation. The Apache Queen rose instantly, her movements fluid and commanding. She gestured subtly to Jack, signaling him to hold his ground. This was a moment that demanded more than skill. It demanded judgment. Jack's instincts kicked in. He remained calm, assessing the attacker's numbers, movements, and weaknesses. Every muscle in his body was taut, every sense alert. He realized that hesitation could not only cost him his life, but jeopardize the Queen and her people. Without a word, he drew his revolver, carefully targeting a warrior who advanced too close, and fired with precision, not recklessly, but decisively. The attacker fell and the others paused, uncertain of the strength and skill of the man who had intervened. The Queen moved like a shadow, striking with swift, calculated precision. Jack observed, impressed, but also aware that her glance occasionally flicked to him, evaluating his judgment under pressure. She needed to know that he was more than just a fighter. He was capable of discernment, restraint, and loyalty when lives were at stake. Together, though unspoken and unplanned, they formed an unsteady alliance, a silent partnership born of necessity and instinct. As the skirmish unfolded, Jack covered the Queen's flank, intercepting an attacker who sought to exploit a blind spot. His movements were deliberate, showing both courage and an understanding of her combat style. The Queen acknowledged his actions with a subtle nod. Small gestures in her world carried as much weight as words. The attackers, realizing they were outmatched and outmaneuvered, retreated into the shadows, leaving the camp intact. In the aftermath, the Queen regarded Jack fully for the first time. Her expression softened just slightly, a subtle acknowledgement of trust earned through action. "You acted wisely," she said. Her voice, still commanding, carried a hint of approval. Many would have panicked. Many would have endangered more than themselves. You did neither. Jack wiped the sweat from his brow, letting the tension of the encounter drain slowly. He knew this was a pivotal moment. Trust, he realized, was not given lightly in her world. It was earned through courage, intelligence, and a demonstration that one's presence did not threaten, but could contribute. By standing alongside her in the chaos of the attack, he had proven that he was capable of acting not just for himself, but in alignment with her needs and the safety of her people. For a long moment, silence enveloped them. The crackling campfires reflected in their eyes, illuminating two figures bound by a momentary understanding that transcended words. The Apache Queen, deadly and revered, had assessed him in combat and found him worthy. Jack, brave and tested, had learned that survival in this world required more than skill. It demanded honor, discernment, and trust. As the night deepened and the canyon grew quiet once more, Jack realized the true gravity of the moment. He had moved beyond being a visitor in the Queen's world. He had become someone who could earn her respect, and perhaps even her tentative trust. It was fragile, delicate, yet it marked a turning point, the first step toward a connection that neither legend nor fear could have predicted. In the stillness of the desert night, Jack understood something vital. Courage could win battles, but trust could forge bonds, and in the unforgiving world of the frontier, bonds could be the difference between life and death. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, spilling golden rays across the canyon walls and casting long shadows across the Apache camp. Jack Callahan had spent the night under a sky dusted with stars, reflecting on the events that had tested his courage, skill, and judgment. Yet as he rose, he sensed that the true turning point of his journey was about to unfold, a moment that would determine not only his fate, but the legacy of the encounter itself. The Apache Queen emerged from her tent, moving with the fluid grace of someone utterly at ease in her domain. Her eyes, sharp and discerning, scanned the camp and then fell upon Jack. For the first time, there was a subtle shift in her demeanor. It was not softness nor friendliness. She was still the formidable, commanding leader whose reputation struck fear into men, but there was acknowledgement, recognition, and perhaps even a hint of admiration. The events of the previous night had spoken volumes, and now the Queen was ready to act in a way that would solidify the bond between them. A commotion rose from the far edge of the camp. A group of rival scouts, emboldened by the night, attempted to slip past the main perimeter, seeking to catch the Apache warriors unprepared. Without hesitation, Jack and the Queen moved in unison, their actions synchronized by instinct and experience. Jack's sharp aim and steady hand neutralized the immediate threat, while the Queen's swift movements commanded her warriors to positions that ensured no further danger. Their combined efforts were precise, efficient, and lethal in their elegance. Once the threat was neutralized, the Queen turned her attention fully to Jack. She gestured for him to stand beside her, a move that would have been unthinkable just hours earlier. Around them, her warriors watched silently, a mixture of surprise and respect evident on their faces. Jack realized that he had passed not just a test of courage, but a demonstration of character. He had shown loyalty, intelligence, and restraint when it mattered most. This was the moment where survival transformed into recognition. "You are no ordinary man," the Queen said, her voice low but carrying across the camp. "Many have come into my domain seeking glory or profit. You have come with respect, skill, and courage. That is why you stand here alive today." Her words were deliberate, measured, and powerful. They echoed through Jack's mind, confirming what he had sensed. This encounter had shifted the balance. He was no longer just a visitor. He had earned a place, however temporary, in her world. The warriors whispered among themselves, their expressions changing from caution to admiration. Jack could feel the weight of their acknowledgement, a silent approval that he had not only survived, but earned the respect of those who had once viewed him as an intruder. The Queen's gesture, small but monumental, marked a turning point. He had become part of a story that would be remembered, a living testament to the power of courage combined with understanding. Jack met her gaze, nodding subtly. "I did what I had to," he said quietly, "but I wouldn't have survived without learning from you first." His words were honest, humble, and earned through experience. The Queen's lips curved slightly, a rare expression of approval or amusement, as she recognized his sincerity. As the sun climbed higher, the canyon transformed from a place of shadows and danger into a stage for legend. Jack Callahan had not only faced the Apache Queen, but had earned her recognition through bravery, wisdom, and respect. This turning point marked the moment when two worlds, his own frontier life and her realm of disciplined power, intersected to create a story that would endure far beyond the limits of the canyon. In that quiet, powerful morning, Jack understood that he had crossed a threshold. He had proven himself worthy, but more importantly, he had become part of a legend that would ripple across the frontier, inspiring awe, respect, and the knowledge that courage and honor could triumph even in the most dangerous of worlds. The morning sun climbed higher over the canyon, bathing the rugged terrain in a warm, golden light. Jack Callahan stood near the edge of the camp, his horse grazing quietly nearby, and watched the Apache warriors move with precision and calm. The events of the past hours had transformed the atmosphere from tension and suspicion to one of cautious respect. A bond had been formed, fragile yet undeniable, between a wandering cowboy and a legendary queen whose name inspired fear across the frontier. The Apache Queen approached, her steps measured, her gaze steady. She carried herself with the same commanding presence that had both terrified and fascinated Jack since the first glimpse he had caught of her atop the ridge. Yet now her eyes held something more, a recognition that Jack was not merely a visitor who had stumbled into her world, but a man who had proven his courage, judgment, and respect through actions rather than words. "You have shown what many cannot," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of authority and wisdom. "Courage alone is not enough. Skill alone is not enough. It is the combination, tempered by respect, that allows a man to survive here and to earn the trust of those who rule it." Her words were both acknowledgment and lesson, a rare glimpse into the mind of a woman who had built her power through intellect, discipline, and fearlessness. Jack nodded, understanding fully the meaning behind her words. He had come seeking adventure, perhaps a story to be told, but he had gained something far more valuable, a glimpse into a world where respect, intelligence, and bravery were intertwined in ways he had never experienced. He realized that the frontier, for all its wildness, had a structure, a code, and the Queen's world operated within it flawlessly. Survival there demanded far more than instinct. It demanded honor, patience, and an understanding of forces larger than oneself. Around them, the warriors moved with a quiet efficiency, their eyes occasionally flicking toward Jack. The initial suspicion had transformed into acknowledgement. The cowboy had not just survived, he had proven himself worthy. In that recognition, Jack sensed a new understanding forming, a bridge between two worlds that had often been in conflict but could, in rare moments, meet on common ground. The Queen gestured to Jack, inviting him to walk beside her as she moved through the camp. "You leave today with more than survival," she said, her tone softening slightly. "You leave with knowledge. You leave with understanding. And perhaps, if the stories are told correctly, you leave with legend." Her words carried weight, a blend of respect, challenge, and an unspoken bond that transcended the boundaries of language or culture. Jack felt the weight of the moment. He had entered her world as a stranger, armed only with courage and curiosity, and now he departed as someone who had earned acknowledgement, trust, and an understanding that few outsiders could claim. It was a rare honor, one that transformed fear into respect, suspicion into recognition, and isolation into connection. As he mounted his horse and prepared to leave the camp behind, Jack cast a final glance at the Apache Queen. She remained poised, regal and formidable, a living legend who had tested him, judged him, and ultimately accepted him on terms that few could hope to meet. The bond forged that night and morning was not one of friendship in the conventional sense, but something deeper, a mutual acknowledgement of courage, skill, and understanding that transcended fear. Riding away from the canyon, Jack felt the thrill of survival, the pride of earned respect, and the knowledge that he had become part of a story that would be told for generations. In the unforgiving world of the frontier, he had discovered that courage could win battles, but bonds, however fragile, could redefine legends. The wind carried his thoughts across the open plains, whispering promises of adventure, respect, and the enduring memory of the deadly queen who had recognized the bravery of a lone cowboy. The story of Jack Callahan and the Apache Queen had begun as whispers in the dusty streets of Red Rock, carried from one tavern to another, from one campfire to the next. Over time, it grew, expanding beyond the confines of the frontier town to reach settlers, cowboys, and wandering traders across the plains. It was no longer just a tale of survival. It became a legend, one that balanced fear, respect, and the rare triumph of courage tempered by wisdom. Jack himself rode alone across the open plains, the horizon stretching endlessly before him. He felt the weight of the encounter in a way that went beyond memory. It had changed him. Every ridge, every canyon, every quiet stretch of desert reminded him of the night he had entered the Queen's domain and faced a test unlike any other. He had survived, yes, but more importantly, he had learned something profound about bravery, honor, and understanding. Survival without respect was hollow, he realized. Only when courage met wisdom could a man truly claim victory. Meanwhile, far to the west, the Apache Queen continued to rule her people with the same combination of intelligence, strength, and unyielding discipline that had defined her for decades. Yet the encounter with Jack remained in her thoughts. He had been different from those who had come before, fearless, respectful, and clever. The memory of his actions, the precise movements, the careful judgment, the courage under pressure, remained a story she could recount to her warriors as a rare example of an outsider who had met her on equal terms. The frontier, vast and untamed, was a place where stories became immortal. Tales of Jack's bravery and the Queen's deadly skill traveled ahead of him, carried by travelers, cowboys, and soldiers alike. In campfires and saloons, people spoke of the cowboy who had entered the Queen's territory and emerged alive, not through luck alone, but through intelligence, courage, and respect. His name became synonymous with daring and skill, a reminder that legends were not born of fear but forged in the crucible of challenge and character. Years later, the canyon itself seemed to hum with the memory of their encounter. Settlers spoke of a cowboy who had ridden into the unknown and lived, and of a queen whose wisdom and strength had made her a figure of awe and reverence. The story became part of the frontier's collective consciousness, a tale parents told their children to teach them about courage, honor, and the delicate balance between fear and respect. For Jack, the legacy was more personal. Every ride across the plains reminded him of what he had faced and what he had learned. He knew that the frontier could be cruel, unforgiving, and unpredictable, but it could also reward intelligence, respect, and bravery. The memory of the Apache Queen, of her formidable presence and the subtle acknowledgement she had granted him, remained etched in his mind, a constant reminder of the rare and extraordinary encounter that had defined a part of his life forever. In the end, the story of the cowboy and the queen endured, not just as a tale of survival, but as a lesson in the power of courage, respect, and understanding. It became a legend that transcended time, whispered across campfires and over open plains, inspiring generations of men and women who dared to challenge the unknown. The frontier had its share of dangers and its share of heroes. But some stories, like that of Jack Callahan and the Apache Queen, lived beyond the ordinary, reminding all who heard them that bravery, tempered by wisdom and honor, could create a legacy far greater than any battle won or enemy defeated. And so, their story continued to ride the winds of the plains, eternal, untamed, and unforgettable.